Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. As you may or may not already know, I cover true crime cases, current true crime news, and events on this channel. If this is the type of content you enjoy, please help the channel by hitting that subscribe button, like this video, leave a comment down below, and share on any and all social media platforms, whether you are watching this on YouTube or any other podcast platform that this is available on. I know I took an incredibly long break from uploading, but it is a new year, and I bet you all can guess that one of my New Year's resolutions is to make a ton of content this year for the channel, which I am very excited about. We are on case number 30, and of course, I come back swinging with a very gruesome solved case for you guys. Let's get into it. This is the story of the murder of 16-year-old Adrianne Reynolds. Like every story worth telling, let's start at the very beginning. Adrianne Lee Reynolds was born on September 12, 1988 in El Dorado, Arkansas. Her mother, Carolyn, was just a teenager herself when she gave birth to her daughter at just 16 years old. Carolyn struggled with her duties as a young mother, so Carolyn's mother, Adrianne's grandmother, Beverly, took Adrianne in and raised her along with her then husband, Tony Reynolds. Beverly and Tony legally adopted Adrianne and raised her as their own for the first few years of her life. In 1992, before Adrianne turned 4 years old, Beverly and Tony officially separated. But Tony remained in Adrianne's life as her main father figure. He would visit her often and continue to send money to Beverly to help support her. By 1995, Carolyn had reappeared in Adrianne's life and was now also helping to raise Adrianne with Beverly. The three of them moved together in Longview, Texas for a little while. And despite now this long distance, Tony still stood up to the plate and remained a part of Adrianne's life. Carolyn had gotten married a couple of times and had another child at this point. As far as I understand, Carolyn tried to create a stable household for her family, but it seemed like her and Adrianne just weren't seeing eye to eye. By the year 2000, when Adrianne was 12 years old, she had begun to act out and wasn't willing to listen to Carolyn. This could have been resentment, or this could have been normal teenage rebellion. Both of them were constantly fighting. They just didn't get along. Adrianne was getting older and was rebelling as many teenagers do. Adrianne had a big problem with authority, and she didn't like anyone telling her what to do. She also began experimenting with drugs and sex at this very young age. All in all, it just wasn't a cohesive environment for a child to grow up surrounded in, and it was becoming more toxic as time went on. Not only were they fighting, but according to Carolyn, Adrianne was starting to hang out with what she described as a druggy crowd, and she was extremely worried for her daughter. In 2003, Carolyn and Adrianne's relationship became so bad that Carolyn reached out to Tony, called him up, and begged him to allow Adrianne to stay with him for a while. Tony no longer lived in Arkansas at this point. He had relocated back to his home state of Illinois and was living in East Moline with his new wife, his former high school sweetheart, Joanne. Tony agreed to take Adrianne in to live with him and Joanne and her children, so she moved from Texas to Illinois at 14 years old and started school at Glenview Middle School. This move to East Moline was a struggle for Adrianne, mostly because she hated school. It wasn't because Adrianne wasn't smart. She was just one of those people that had a hard time learning, and I honestly think that she didn't have the desire to participate in academics and hated doing homework. None of it was ever of any interest to her. Adrianne was way more focused on growing her social life than getting an education or receiving good grades. Adrianne was definitely a social butterfly. She loved making friends, she loved having friends, and she had a really fun and outgoing personality. But unfortunately, due to the constant lack of not caring about her education, Adrianne struggled to complete the school year at Glenview Middle. Living with Tony and Joanne was also becoming tumultuous due to the arguments about her failing grades. And Adrianne begged Tony to send her back to her mother, Carolyn, which he did once the school year had officially ended. Adrianne went back to live with Carolyn, but old habits almost immediately came back. The fighting between them quickly started again, and this time it became worse than ever. After only 4 months, in November of 2004, Carolyn sent Adrianne back to East Moline to live with Tony and Joanne again. This time, with the consideration of Adrianne's behavior and learning issues, they enrolled her into the Black Hawk College Outreach Center, which is basically an alternative school that targets students who aren't suited for regular public school learning environments. The plan was for Adrianne to earn her GED, and then she would immediately join the United States Marine Corps. This plan was a very new plan for her future, but Adrianne was determined that this was the right path for her to take. Adrianne was also a very passionate singer and had dreams of performing one day as a contestant on American Idol. Her Her family and friends all talk about how Adrianne was always singing and how she had such a beautiful voice. Her stepmother Joanne even stated, quote, "You didn't know if it was her singing or if it was the radio. I couldn't tell," end quote. Although Adrianne's ultimate dream was to be a country singer, she had put this dream on the back burner and decided to pursue a more realistic path to join the Marines. Adrianne was working as hard as she could to earn her GED. Now being back in East Moline and in a completely new school, she quickly began to make new friends who gave her the cute little nickname Texas due to her accent. She had also started to work part-time at a Checkers to start making money for herself. Adrianne Reynolds started to once again thrive socially and was already becoming a popular student within the halls of Black Hawk. Adrianne has been described as a spunky, vibrant, fun-loving, fierce, loyal, and charismatic young woman. She was a very easy person to like, and that was the way she wanted it. It's clear as day that Adrianne wanted to be liked by everyone. She wanted to fit in with her peers. Adrianne was finally starting to get on the right path after struggling a lot in her early life. But Adrianne never got to join the Marines. She never got to live her dream and sing on American Idol. She never got to live up to her full potential because her life was ripped away from her by two people that she had called her friends. Shortly after starting classes at Black Hawk, like I said, it didn't take long for the pretty and outgoing new girl Adrianne to make friends. She unfortunately met and befriended two students at Black Hawk, 16-year-old Sarah Kolb and 17-year-old Corey Gregory. And if you guys are a returning watcher, you know the drill at this point. From this point forward, I'm only going to refer to these dumbasses as SK and CG. SK was also part of the popular crowd and was known for her bad attitude and alpha woman behavior. She had an appearance that stood out. She had this gothic vibe to her. She dyed her hair different colors, mostly black. She had several face piercings. She wore nothing but all black clothing and band t-shirts. She was known for constantly listening to heavy metal music. This was in the mid-2000s. You guys know the look that I'm talking about. SK seemingly was a very angry girl and would frequently write down her hateful thoughts in her journal. One of her notes read, quote, "What is it with people today? It seems as if everyone is driving me crazy, and all I want to do is slaughter them like the fucking sheep that they are," end quote. She wrote several angry entries like that in her journal, so clearly she was not a happy person. CG, on the other hand, was like a lovesick puppy dog to SK. He followed her everywhere and went along with anything she wanted to do. They had originally met each other at the mall one day. They snuck behind one of the department stores, smoked some weed together, and after this, they were inseparable. CG was harboring a serious crush on SK. Once he had met her, he went from a fun-loving, straight-A student to a pathetic and whipped stoner. His grades quickly fell, and that's when he himself was transferred to Black Hawk, where SK was already attending classes. Both teenagers were self-proclaimed juggalos, which, if you don't know what a juggalo is, it's what the dedicated followers of the band Insane Clown Posse, also known as ICP, called themselves. I've got to say, I've never heard of this band before researching this case, but after finding out what these two dipshits did to Adrianne, I think I have a pretty good idea of what type of music Insane Clown Posse creates. This, of course, doesn't mean everyone who describes themselves as a juggalo would do something so heinous, of course, but we are talking about sick individuals here. Anyway, SK and CG were briefly involved in a romantic relationship for a few weeks, but it seems like SK ended things as she didn't feel the same way CG felt about her as she felt for him. She had made it very clear to him that she was more attracted to women than she was for men, but even though their romantic relationship didn't work out, that didn't stop their friendship. It seems like CG, in his mind, figured that if he just waited long enough, stood by her side, no matter what, then SK would eventually see him as her boyfriend instead of just her best friend. It was as if CG had worshipped the ground that SK stood on. His feelings for her were that deep. Once Adrianne started attending classes, SK was immediately attracted to Adrianne. She was this beautiful girl with a cute Texas accent, and she wanted to get to know her from the moment she laid eyes on Adrianne. She started writing notes to Adrianne during class. At first, they started out as simple notes asking her questions like, what was her favorite color, or what type of music do you like? Then they became more flirtatious and sexual notes. And Adrianne was responding to these flirtatious notes right back to her, flirting with her as well. They spent the next couple of weeks passing these notes to each other. SK was asking Adrianne if she was into girls, and Adrianne said she was bi-curious, which this was more than good enough for SK. But this flirtatious relationship quickly turned sour one night when both Adrianne and SK were at a party together. At this party, allegedly, Adrianne was flirting with other boys the entire night, and at one point, Adrianne left and had sex with one of the boys at this party. When she returned to the party, she told SK, and she went berserk with jealousy. She screamed at Adrianne, calling her a slut, a whore, and every other name in the book. According to CG, both girls fought every single day after this night. Adrianne tried to reach out and smooth things over with SK, as she still wanted to be friends with her. But every time she tried calling her or wrote notes to her to resolve their issues, SK would just hang up the phone and throw away all the notes. If Adrianne tried to talk to her at school, it typically ended up in a screaming match. Several students at Black Hawk witnessed SK threatening to kill or to kick Adrianne's ass on multiple occasions, and she even wrote that she wanted to kill Adrianne in her journal. While Adrianne and SK's relationship was a shit show, Adrianne began spending a lot of time with CG. They began talking on the phone for hours at a time, and then they started hanging out together, meeting up with each other at different locations. At first, CG kept this growing friendship with Adrianne a secret from SK, as he knew that she would be extremely pissed if she knew about this growing relationship. But of course, like the whipped, pathetic man that he is, he blabbed to SK, and as expected, she was beyond furious. She was upset with CG a little bit, but SK focused her anger directly at Adrianne Reynolds. She blamed her for basically stealing CG, her best friend, away from her. Once SK found out about the growing friendship between Adrianne and CG, the fighting at the school became even worse. SK would yell at Adrianne basically every day, calling her horrible names and telling her to take her own life. It would get to the point where SK would make Adrianne cry because of what she was saying. Adrianne was very upset by the situation. She did confide to her stepmother Joanne of how scared she was of SK, and that she was bad-mouthing her and threatening her at school. And of course, Joanne was extremely concerned about this news that Adrianne was telling her, but Adrianne told her that she would handle the situation. Adrianne continued to extend an olive branch to SK and was continuously shot down by her. The hatred that SK had for Adrianne was boiling up, and it was about to explode. The night of January 20th, 2005 was a normal night for Adrianne. Her father, Tony, came into her room to wish her goodnight, as he normally did, and told her that he loved her before going to sleep. Adrianne told him she loved him too, gave him a kiss on the cheek, and he left for bed. Tony had an early morning shift the following morning, and he knew he wouldn't get to see Adrianne when she woke up. But he had no idea that this would be the last time he would see his daughter alive. Adrianne woke up the next morning for school as normal. Joanne had asked Adrianne if she had a shift at Checkers later in the day, and Adrianne told her that she did have a shift at 5 p.m., and then she left for school. On the morning of Friday, January 21st, 2005, the same day that Adrianne's life would be taken from her, SK wrote in her journal at school that morning, quote, "Stupid bitch needs to back up off my Kool-Aid. She's going to give him a note? Yeah? Well, I'll fucking kill her." End quote. After writing this journal entry, SK found Adrianne at school, and to Adrianne's complete shock, instead of SK screaming at her and calling her names, she was actually nice to her. SK made Adrianne believe that she had wanted to repair their friendship, that she finally wanted to resolve all the issues that they had been having. Adrianne was beyond happy to finally get this second chance at a friendship that she had been begging SK to give her for weeks now. SK then invited Adrianne to have lunch with her, CG, and another boy in the friend group that SK had recently began dating, named Sean McKintrick. After school was let out for lunch, the four teens drove to Taco Bell in SK's car. CG was driving, Sean was in the passenger seat, and Adrianne and SK were in the back seat. During the drive, SK had asked Adrianne what she thought about Sean, and Adrianne responded that she thought he was hot. The moment that she said this, SK lost it. She went into a full rage and started hitting Adrianne, punching her in the face, pulling her hair, once again repeatedly calling her a whore. CG and Sean were unsure of what to do. They had made it into the Taco Bell parking lot as SK and Adrianne continued to hit each other. SK being, of course, the aggressor, and Adrianne trying to defend herself, but also getting in hits herself. Sean told them to stop fighting several times, But instead of stopping, this fight was escalating. SK snapped at Sean and basically told him that if he didn't like it, then he could just go ahead and leave. And that's exactly what Sean did. He had had enough of this, he wanted no part of it, and he exited the car and walked away from the Taco Bell. As SK and Adrianne continued fighting, CG says that he just sat there in the driver's seat and smoked a cigarette. He didn't attempt to de-escalate this fight. He didn't try to break the two girls apart. No, he just sat there like the loser he truly is and smoked. So he claims, at least. Since this was happening in the parking lot of a Taco Bell, there were a few people who noticed some sort of violent situation from within the car. They saw a lot of movement, they heard a lot of yelling, but no one ended up intervening. It was a cold day, there was fog around the car. They couldn't really see exactly what was going on. What happened next depends on who you ask, because we don't know what the real truth is. And sadly, Adrianne is not here to shed some light for us. According to CG, SK had grabbed this stick that she had kept in her car for protection and began beating Adrianne. Adrianne tried to fight back, but SK had managed to overpower her, and then she strangled Adrianne to death with a belt. According to SK, the girls were fighting, then CG took it upon himself to jump into this fight, and he held Adrianne down as he strangled her to death with his own belt. The prosecutors of this case tell another story, which is the version I tend to believe, as do many other people who read about this case. Putting the pieces of this investigation together, it is believed that SK initiated the fight out of jealousy. The girls were fighting, both girls were evenly matched, doing a lot of damage to each other. Then at some point, SK grabs the stick she keeps in the car for protection, begins to brutally beat Adrianne with it, but as Adrianne tries to get away from the situation, SK instructs CG to hold her down as she continues to beat her with the stick. CG obeys because he is a pathetic little lapdog that does anything and everything SK says, and as he is holding Adrianne down, SK grabs the belt CG is wearing and strangles Adrianne with it until she completely stops breathing. Once Adrianne is dead, both SK and CG smoke and sit there for several minutes, at first thinking that Adrianne is going to eventually wake up. But as time passes, Adrianne of course doesn't wake up. Her face and lips turned blue, and they realized that she is dead. Upon this realization, both SK and CG enter into panic mode, and almost immediately decide that they need to get rid of Adrianne's body. SK covers Adrianne's body with a large coat that was already in the backseat of the car, and she tells CG that the best thing that they can do at this point is to get rid of Adrianne's body and take it to her grandfather's farm to bury it on their property. They leave the Taco Bell parking lot with SK driving, CG riding in the passenger seat, and with Adrianne's body covered by the large coat in the backseat's floorboard. First, SK stops at her own house to change her clothes and tells her stepfather, who was in the house, that she was with CG and that they were going to visit her grandparents at their farmhouse. Before leaving, SK took a gas can and a blue tarp from the garage and threw these items in the trunk of her car. They drive to her grandparents' farm, which was about a 45-minute car ride from her house. At one point, SK and CG stopped the car near a wooded area, took Adrianne's body out from the backseat floorboard, shoved her into the trunk, and covered her with the tarp. When they made it to the farm, they took her body that was wrapped in the tarp, and they walked through the woods where they decided to try and bury her body near an open field. CG would later testify during the trial that because the ground was too frozen, they were unable to dig a hole, so instead, they decided to pour gasoline on Adrianne's body and set it on fire. I don't understand why these idiots always seem to think that it is super easy to set a human body on fire. And notice, it's always young teenagers who try doing this for some reason too. This case really does remind me of another case I've covered on this channel, the murder of 12-year-old Shanda Sharer. There are a lot of similarities between both of these cases. I will leave a link in the description below if anyone wants to watch Shanda's case, after finishing this video of course. Or not, you could just hop off and watch Shanda's video. That works too. CG admitted that he was the one who poured the gasoline and used a lighter in an attempt to set Adrianne's body on fire. And get this bullshit. CG had the audacity to claim that they weren't doing this to avoid getting caught and to get away with her murder. He said that since they couldn't bury her due to the ground being frozen, they thought that the proper thing to do was to try and cremate her instead. He basically tried to sell the narrative that, yeah, even though Adrianne was brutally murdered, they still had the decency to do a proper send-off for Adrianne, which, to be clear, they did the exact opposite. Because of them, Adrianne's body would be completely destroyed. There was nothing proper about what they did to her or her body after they murdered her. After several failed attempts to light Adrianne's body on fire, they finally realized that gasoline and a tiny lighter wasn't working to set the body on fire. It is alleged that they tried to burn her body into ashes for over 6 hours that day. They then moved on to Plan C. SK told CG that he would need to step up and dismember Adrianne's body so they could more easily dispose of the pieces instead of just her entire body. CG instantly told her he couldn't do it. I guess pouring gasoline and trying to burn her body into ashes for several hours was perfectly fine for him to do, as fucked up as that is, but dismembering her was where he drew the line. SK also didn't want to be the one to do this. She was the boss, right? So she didn't want to get her hands dirty. But luckily for them, they knew someone that would have no problem doing this. And here's where we introduce another psychopath in this case, 16-year-old Nate Gaudette. This kid was known by everyone of being disturbingly into blood and gore. People knew that he enjoyed killing animals for fun. They thought he would be delighted to dismember Adrianne's body for them. And disgustingly, they were correct. They called Nate up, asked him if he wanted to hang out with them that night. He agreed to, so SK and CG left Adrianne's body in the woods and went to Nate's house, where they did some drugs, and then they fell asleep. The next day, they woke up in the early afternoon on Saturday, January 22nd, and SK got up and left to go to her shift at the movie theater. Once her shift ended, she picked up CG and Nate, and that's when they told him about Adrianne's murder. Nate would claim he was shocked by this revelation, but SK and CG begged him for his help to dismember Adrianne's body, and it's still unbelievable to me, but he agreed to help them with this. I feel like sometimes when I research these cases and when people do the dumbest things, like involve themselves in a murder that they had originally nothing to do with, by helping the killers get rid of the victim's body, it makes me lose IQ points. I seriously can feel my intellect diminishing sometimes with how idiotic these people are in some of the cases I cover. But let's move on. On Sunday, January 23rd, all three of them drove back to SK's grandparents' farm where they retrieved Adrianne's body from the woods, and they spent the rest of the day dismembering her body. Nate cut off all of her limbs, her head, and cut her torso in half with a hacksaw he had taken from his own grandfather's garage, while CG and SK smoked some weed, watched, and assisted him with putting the body parts in different trash bags. After this was complete, they then went to a couple of different locations to dispose of the body parts. They dumped most of her body in a ravine near SK's grandparents' farm. Then they drove to a park called the Black Hawk Historic Site with the trash bag that contained Adrianne's severed head and both of her arms, and placed that trash bag in a manhole, thinking that even if they did find her other remains that they had dumped in the ravine, they wouldn't be able to identify that it was Adrianne Reynolds' body. Then, of course, and at this point, it's a tale as old as time on this channel, after they dumped all of Adrianne's remains, the three dipshits went to and ate at a McDonald's. I guess the McDouble is a popular meal for killers. I don't know. Just the fact that after watching and dismembering a 16-year-old girl's corpse, these people are able to eat anything afterwards tells me exactly what type of monsters these people truly are. The entire thing is truly sickening. These are kids that have done this. It's one thing to be an adult doing these things. It's a whole other level when teenagers do this. Let's go ahead and backtrack just a little bit and talk about the search for Adrianne. Joanne, Adrianne's stepmother, first became concerned about where Adrianne was shortly after school was supposed to be let out on January 21st. Adrianne would always come home immediately after school to change into her work uniform on the days she had a shift at Checkers. On this day, Joanne noticed that she didn't come home to change into her uniform, and she knew that Adrianne had a 5 p.m. shift that day. Adrianne had told her this, so immediately alarm bells were going off for Joanne. Joanne reached out to Tony and told him that Adrianne never came home from school, And he also thought this was out of character, so both Joanne and Tony got into their cars and went to the Checkers, where they discovered that Adrianne never came to work for her shift. They went back home and waited for Adrianne for a couple of hours, but as we know, she never came back home. According to Joanne, she called the police to report Adrianne missing at 8 o'clock that night. And it's frustrating because the police weren't very concerned about Adrianne being missing. They immediately told the family that she probably just ran away and she would come back home when she was ready. Tony was not accepting this answer, though. He told the police that all of her belongings were accounted for, and she didn't even cash her most recent paycheck yet, so it didn't make any sense for them to come to the conclusion that Adrianne just ran away. Thankfully, the police did start searching for Adrianne the same day she had been reported missing, after Tony had to basically beg them to do so. It didn't take very long for the police to find out that SK and CG were the last people to have seen Adrianne. Multiple witnesses from school told them that Adrianne had left with them that day during lunch. So they reached out to SK first and asked her about the last time she saw Adrianne. She told them that the last time she saw her was around 12:30 or 1 o'clock when her and CG dropped Adrianne off at a nearby McDonald's. She claimed that Adrianne told them that she did not want to be dropped off at home that day. SK said that they got to the McDonald's and Adrianne got out of the car and that she hadn't seen her since then. She told the police that she thought that Adrianne ran away. And then this bitch had the audacity to act concerned about Adrianne. She pleaded with the police to contact her again if they found out anything about Adrianne. Tony and Joanne drove around the entire city, desperately looking for any sign of Adrianne. They made thousands of missing person flyers for her. Investigators then spoke to CG, and at first he told them the exact same story as SK did, that they dropped her off at a McDonald's parking lot and that he had not seen Adrianne since. As the search for Adrianne continued, by Monday, January 24th, CG couldn't handle what he had done anymore, and he informed his parents that he needed to talk to the police about the disappearance of Adrianne Reynolds, and that they were going to need to get him a lawyer. He went into another interview where he answered their questions the same way, but when he got home that night, he broke down into tears, and his father was able to get it out of him that something had happened to Adrianne. So the next day, he told the police his version of events of Adrianne's murder. On January 26, he led the police to the area near SK's grandparents' farmhouse where they had attempted to burn Adrianne's body, and he would also be the one to lead them to the 2 locations where they had discarded her remains. After finding the trash bags that held Adrianne's remains, the police contacted Tony and Joanne and made probably one of the most horrible phone calls imaginable. And the police told them that Adrianne was dead, but they did not inform them at this point about her dismemberment. They learned about those details after SK, CG, and Nate were all arrested. On February 1st, 2005, SK and CG were arrested and charged as adults with 2 counts of first-degree murder and concealment of homicide. Nate was, of course, also arrested and charged as a juvenile with concealment of a homicide. Things moved pretty fast after the arrests. Shockingly, and yes, I am being extremely sarcastic, both SK and CG had pled not guilty for the charges. And on top of that, when they did go to trial, they pointed the finger at each other. SK blamed the murder on CG, and CG returned the favor by blaming SK. SK had her trial first on October 31st, 2005. SK took the stand and told the court that Adrianne and her had gotten into a fight and that CG had taken off his belt and strangled Adrianne to death. SK stated that she was so scared and overwhelmed and she didn't know what to do, so she did nothing. The prosecution brought up everything from her journal entries to the many witnesses who claimed to have heard SK threatening to kill Adrianne on several occasions. The jury deliberated for almost 15 hours before announcing that they were deadlocked, and the judge had to declare a mistrial. A second trial for SK started on February 6, 2006, and this time, she was not as lucky. Thank God. She was found guilty on all charges, and she was ultimately sentenced to a total of 53 years in prison. 48 years in prison for the murder of Adrianne itself, and 5 years for the concealment charge. CG, after finding out SK was deemed guilty, made the common sense decision to change his plea from not guilty to guilty. On July 10, 2006, he was sentenced to 40 years in prison for the murder and 5 years for concealment, resulting in a 45-year prison term. On a very different note, both CG and SK, since the time that they've been incarcerated, have both transitioned. SK now goes by the name of Shane, and CG has transitioned into a woman and now goes by the name of Harley Quinn. And because I'm not going to let this person ruin the name of a beloved DC villain, I'm only going to be calling this person CG and this person SK. And no, I'm not sorry about it. They didn't give Adrianne any respect. They both could have saved her life that day. They had the power and they chose not to. So no, I will not be giving any type of respect to these people. But let's not forget about Nate. He ended up pleading guilty and was given a juvenile sentence of only 5 years. He was released on November 11th, 2008, after serving almost 4 out of the 5 years. But on April 16th, 2012, he died in a motorcycle accident at the age of 23. So, despite his very short sentence, it seems like karma had gotten him in the end. SK, however, has tried everything within her power to get out of prison. I know, it's surprising, isn't it? She filed an appeal claiming that her long sentence was unconstitutional because she was a minor herself at the time of Adrianne Reynolds' murder.
The woman convicted of killing a Moline girl back in 2005 is now requesting a reduced sentence. Sarah Kolb was convicted of killing their classmate, 16-year-old Adrianne Reynolds. Police say her body was burned and dismembered after she was killed. Kolb was sentenced to 53 years in prison, but her lawyers are arguing that sentence is cruel and unusual punishment.
But the judge denied this appeal, which was the only right decision in my opinion. Then get this, CG once again followed SK's footsteps and also tried to appeal, and even took the stand at the appeal hearing. I will play this clip for you now.
If I could give my life, I would. I'm sorry, I know it doesn't make a difference. I know you will never forgive me, and I would never ask for it because I do not deserve your forgiveness. And every single day, I wish I could bring her back. It never leaves me.
Is it just me, or does this person sound so insincere and unremorseful? He is sorry and can't bring her back, but still thinks he should be set free? It's disgusting. Adrianne didn't even get to see her 18th birthday, or her 17th birthday for that matter. So if anyone can explain to me in the comments below why either one of these people should ever get to see the light of day ever again, I'd love to hear it.
I'm disgusted because he's the man that gave Adrianne the death penalty.
This was the moment Joanne Reynolds, Adrianne's stepmother, took the stand on Wednesday morning.
It's been 17 years her life was taken. Every day of my life, I think about her fighting and kicking for her life. I think about her grasping for air. I think about body parts down in that manhole.
She brought a picture of Adrianne to court, asking the judge to close the book, while the defense asked for the sentence to be shortened to 20 years.
Adrianne's life is worth more than 20 years. The value of her life is worth more than 20 years.
CG's appeal was also thankfully denied, so it looks like both SK and CG will continue their prison sentences for a very long time. It has been 20 years since Adrianne has been murdered. Her family doesn't get to have peace knowing what happened to her and what happened to her body after she had been killed.
I can't believe it's been 20 years. That's the strangest part.
Tony and Joanna Reynolds will often visit their daughter Adrianne at her gravesite, where for 20 years, time has stood still.
I hate it. Some people say, don't come visit me here because I'm not here. And I kind of look at it as this is the last place I've seen you, so this is where you are to me.
She wanted to be somebody, but she wanted to be known, but what a heck of a way to be known.
An angel looks down on her. In the winter months, the Christmas blanket they made keeps her warm. Engraved on the bottom of her headstone, Daddy's little girl.
She'll always be 16 to me.
But time has kept moving.
In an unsworn statement today, Kolb stopped short of admitting to killing Adrianne, saying, "I made a mistake I can't help but regret. I know I could have done more to stop what happened."
After Sarah Kolb was convicted of murdering Adrianne, she was sentenced to 53 years. The Reynolds family visiting Adrianne's gravesite after. justice was served, written on their car.
A lot of people get to go home today, except Adrian.
In 2008, Nate Gaudette finished serving his 5-year juvenile sentence. He died in 2012 in a fiery car crash in Indiana.
I don't think of him that often. I think of Adrian more than I do of them.
Instead, remembering what time did give them.
It feels good to talk about Adrianne because it keeps her memory alive. You know, she was somebody. I always think about her singing. She loved to sing.
A sign hanging on her door, a joke from her dad about her messy room, still hangs today.
I can't believe it's still hanging on, but it's still there.
The guitar Adrianne played still in the corner, and shelves once filled with her own trinkets. Now memories of Adrianne left in the yard or on her grave.
A sign somebody wrote to Adrianne from me, I don't know who it was. It says, "Sing with the angels and never stop." I'm with her probably every day.
The Reynolds created a scholarship in honor of Adrianne. Thousands of dollars raised, first with car wash fundraisers, now with GoFundMe, donated to Adrianne's old school, the Black Hawk Outreach Center, to help students pay for their GED test.
A lady we camped with said her grandson was going to Black Hawk Outreach and couldn't afford to buy his test. She said, "I told my grandson, mention Adrian's name," and they did, and they helped him through Adrian's thing. That meant a lot. There were so many people that did so many good things.
A community that supported them all throughout trials, vigils, now still, 20 years later, carrying that support.
I've run into the groundskeepers. I don't know any of them personally, but I'll never forget. One of them told, "We keep eye."
Adrianne used to help Tony bring flowers to graves across the Quad Cities. Tonight, he'll lay pink flowers on hers.
I feel like Adrianne's at peace right now. I think she's in heaven and singing and enjoying, you know, her life in heaven.
But that is pretty much everything I have for this case. I'm glad that the people who had caused Adrianne's death are still to this day rotting in prison. I'm absolutely heartbroken for Adrianne's family and friends. Knowing the details of what happened to her, I can't even imagine how I would feel if someone I loved went through what Adrianne went through. She was so young, and she was just starting to find her own way in the world. She had a rough start to life, and just thinking about how she was finally starting to turn things around for herself, she was looking toward a brighter future, and just to have that ripped away from her is awful. There are no words I can even come up with to describe how terrible it truly is. But that is everything. If you liked this video, give it a thumbs up. Let me know in the comments of your thoughts about this case, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. But until then, bye guys.